Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you don't miss out on future episodes. Today we're diving into a topic that's crucial for anyone who wants to understand how India really works: statutory, regulatory, and quasi-judicial bodies.
These bodies might not always be in the headlines, but they play a huge role in shaping policies, enforcing laws, and basically keeping the machinery of government running smoothly.
So whether you're a UPSC aspirant aiming for those top ranks, a student grappling with the complexities of governance, or just a curious citizen who wants to know how things really function behind the scenes, this deep dive is for you.
We're going to break down these complex concepts, explore real-world examples, and hopefully leave you with a much clearer understanding of how power operates in India.
Exactly. Let's start by laying the foundation with statutory bodies. I remember this term from my school days, but honestly, it always felt a bit abstract. Can you help us understand what exactly are statutory bodies? Why should we care about them?
Well, think of statutory bodies as specialized task forces created by acts of parliament or state legislatures. It's like the government saying, hey, this area is complex, it needs focused attention, so let's create a dedicated body to handle it.
So it's all about delegating responsibility to experts in specific fields.
Exactly. Take the National Human Rights Commission, or NHRC, for example. They have the huge responsibility of protecting and promoting human rights in India.
Right, and that's a complex issue that demands dedicated expertise and resources. It makes sense to have a separate body to tackle it head on.
Exactly. And their powers and duties are clearly defined in the act that establishes them. It's all laid out in black and white, which is crucial for transparency and accountability.
So it's not like they have a free rein to do whatever they want. They're bound by the law that created them.
Absolutely. But what about their relationship with the government? Are they completely independent?
It's a good question. I mean, they're created by the government, but they're also supposed to have a degree of autonomy, right?
That's where things get interesting. And this is something UPSC examiners love to ask about. Statutory bodies have a degree of autonomy, which is essential for them to function effectively and make impartial decisions. But they're not completely independent. The government still oversees their finances and has a say in appointments.
So it's like a balancing act. You want them to have enough freedom to operate effectively, but also mechanisms to ensure they remain accountable and aligned with broader government objectives.
Precisely. It's a delicate dance, and there are always debates about whether certain bodies have too much or too little autonomy.
Can you give us a specific example?
Sure. Take the University Grants Commission, or UGC. They play a crucial role in maintaining standards in higher education and allocating funding. But their relationship with the government, especially concerning academic freedom, is often a subject of intense discussion.
This is reminding me of a recent news article I read about the National Green Tribunal, or NGT. They deal with environmental issues, right? The article talked about how they clashed with the state government over an infrastructure project.
That's a perfect example of how the dynamics between statutory bodies and the government can play out in the real world. The NGT has been known to take a tough stance on environmental violations, even when it means challenging powerful interests.
It highlights the potential for these bodies to act as guardians of public interest, but also the potential for friction and conflict. It's like they have this dual role. They're part of the government structure, but also tasked with holding the government accountable when necessary.
Exactly. And this tension is something we'll see repeatedly as we explore different types of bodies. Before we move on to regulatory bodies, let's quickly recap what we've learned about statutory bodies.
Okay, so they're like specialized teams created by law to tackle specific tasks, taking some of the pressure off the government.
Right, and they operate within clearly defined boundaries. They have a degree of independence, but ultimately they're still accountable to the government and the law.
And we've seen how this plays out in real-world scenarios with bodies like the NHRC, UGC, and the NGT. Okay, now I'm really curious to learn about regulatory bodies and how they fit into this complex system.
Well, then let's dive in. Regulatory bodies are fascinating because they often operate behind the scenes but have significant power in shaping various sectors.
Okay, so we've talked about statutory bodies, those specialized task forces. Now let's move on to regulatory bodies. When I hear that term, I immediately think of watchdogs, like making sure everyone's playing by the rules. Is that a good way to think about it?
You're exactly right. Regulatory bodies are the referees of the governance game. They ensure fair play and protect the public interest in specific sectors.
Okay, so they have some real teeth, huh? Not just barking orders, but actually able to bite if necessary.
Exactly. They set standards, they monitor compliance, and they have the power to enforce regulations and penalize those who break the rules.
So where did this whole concept of having regulatory bodies even come from?
Oh, it's got a fascinating history, actually. The roots can be traced back to the late 19th century, believe it or not, in the United States.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yep, the era of massive industrialization, the rise of powerful corporations, especially the railroads. Remember that from your history classes.
Vaguely, yeah.
Hmm.
I remember something about monopolies and unfair business practices.
Exactly. The public and the government realized that these powerful entities needed some oversight, to prevent them from exploiting consumers or stifling competition.
Right, right.
And so the Interstate Commerce Commission was born in 1887, one of the world's first regulatory bodies.
Wow, so the U.S. was a pioneer in this area, and the idea eventually spread globally.
Exactly. The U.S. experiment with regulatory bodies, despite its initial hiccups, demonstrated the need for independent oversight. In, these increasingly complex economies, today, virtually every country has some form of regulatory framework in place.
Yeah, that makes sense. As systems get more complex, you need specialized expertise, right, to ensure things are running smoothly. But let's bring it back to India. What are some of the key functions of regulatory bodies in our context?
Well, their primary mandate is to safeguard the public interest. Think of them as protectors against exploitation or harm. This might involve shielding consumers from unfair pricing or ensuring businesses adhere to safety standards.
Right. So it's not just about cracking down on bad actors, but also about creating an environment where everyone has a fair shot.
Absolutely. They're responsible for setting the rules of the game and making sure those rules are enforced fairly and transparently.
I'm sure you're already familiar with some of the most prominent regulatory bodies in India, right?
Oh, of course.
SEBI, RBI,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
TRI, these names pop up in the news all the time.
Exactly. The Securities and Exchange Board of India, or SEBI, they regulate the stock market, a world known for its volatility and potential for, well, manipulation.
Right. And with so many people investing these days, their job of protecting investors is more important than ever.
Exactly. Then there's the RBI, the Reserve Bank of India, the big boss of the financial world.
Yeah, managing the country's monetary policy, keeping the banking system in check.
Precisely. Controlling interest rates, managing inflation, acting as a lender of last resort when banks face financial distress.
And TRAI, the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India.
Right.
They're the ones keeping our phone bills from skyrocketing.
Well, not just that. They ensure fair competition in the telecom sector, promote affordable access to these services, and resolve disputes between service providers and consumers.
Oh, right. Remember those pesky telemarketing calls we used to get bombarded with?
Oh, yes.
TRAI played a key role in curbing that.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's amazing to see how these bodies impact our daily lives in so many ways. But it's not always smooth sailing, is it?
You're right. There are some significant hurdles they have to overcome.
Like what?
Well, one pressing issue is what we call regulatory sprawl.
Regulatory sprawl.
Yeah, it's basically the sheer number of regulatory bodies we have.
Oh, right. It's something like 60, you said, right? At both the central and state levels.
Exactly. And with so many players in the field, there's a risk of overlapping jurisdictions, conflicting regulations, and just unnecessary complexity.
Right, so it's like having too many cooks in the kitchen, maybe. Potentially spoiling the broth.
A perfect analogy. This complexity can also create burdens for businesses, trying to comply with all these different regulations. Navigating a maze of overlapping rules can be, well, time-consuming and costly, especially for small businesses.
And then there's the question of effectiveness. Do these regulatory bodies always live up to their mandate?
That's another crucial challenge. Even with the best intentions and a robust framework, they can sometimes fall short. Take the RBI, for example. They've been struggling to effectively control non-performing assets in the banking sector. Despite implementing various measures and tightening regulations, it's still a significant challenge.
It's like having the right tools, but still struggling to fix the problem.
Exactly. One factor is just the sheer complexity of the issues themselves. Unraveling these complexities and finding effective solutions requires, well, a deep understanding of the system and a willingness to make tough decisions.
And sometimes those tough decisions might not be politically popular, right?
Right.
Especially when you have powerful interests involved.
That brings us to another challenge, autonomy. While regulatory bodies are designed to operate independently, they are still part of the government structure.
Right.
And this raises concerns about potential political influence. Governments sometimes try to exert pressure to favor certain businesses or industries.
So the ideal of impartiality and independence can get muddied by real-world politics.
Exactly. And there have been instances where the appointment process for regulatory body heads has raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest.
Right. If individuals with close ties to certain industries are appointed, it undermines the whole purpose of having these independent bodies.
Precisely. And this can really erode public trust in these institutions.
So what about transparency and accountability? How do we make sure these bodies are functioning ethically and effectively?
Transparency and accountability are absolutely crucial for maintaining public trust. This involves making their decisions, their meeting minutes, and their processes accessible to the public.
So sunlight is the best disinfectant, as they say, but is simply making information available enough.
It's a great first step, but it's not enough on its own. There needs to be a robust mechanism for holding them accountable for their actions.
Like what?
Well, things like parliamentary oversight, independent audits, or even public consultations on proposed regulations. This ensures that they are truly serving the public interest.
This has been really eye-opening. I'm starting to see just how complex this world of regulatory bodies is. We've talked about their origins, their crucial role in maintaining order, and the challenges they face.
Absolutely.
So before we move on, let's do a quick recap. Regulatory bodies, they're essentially the watchdogs of the system.
Right.
They're responsible for setting the rules, monitoring compliance, and they have the power to enforce those rules.
Their origins can be traced back to the late 19th century in the U.S., born out of the need to regulate powerful corporations.
And this concept has definitely taken root in India, with bodies like SEBI, RBI, and TRI.
They play a crucial role in shaping our financial, telecommunications, and other vital sectors.
And they strive for independence, but they face challenges. Things like regulatory sprawl, questions about their effectiveness, the need for greater transparency, and the constant push and pull between autonomy and political influence.
It's a complex landscape, but understanding these nuances is really essential for any informed citizen, especially for those aspiring to work in governance and public policy.
We've explored statutory bodies, those specialized task forces, and the watchdogs of the system, the regulatory bodies. Now it's time to tackle a category that, well, often causes some head-scratching, even among those preparing for the UPSC exams. Quasi-judicial bodies. The name itself sounds like a bit of a riddle, like a court, but not really a court. What exactly are these entities?
They're fascinating, aren't they? Occupying this unique space between the executive and judicial branches of government. They have some of the traits of courts, conducting hearings, looking at evidence, issuing orders, but they're not part of the traditional court system.
So they borrow from the legal world, but they operate outside the usual hierarchy of the courts. What's the logic behind this kind of hybrid model? Why not just let the regular courts handle these issues?
Well, one major reason is the sheer volume of cases that our courts face. India's judicial system is burdened, leading to delays. Sometimes these delays can stretch on for years. Quasi-judicial bodies offer a more streamlined path for certain disputes, often with much faster turnaround times.
So it's about efficiency, speed, especially when dealing with issues that require specialized knowledge. Kind of like a dedicated fast-track court for specific types of cases.
Exactly. Think of the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal, for example. Instead of adding to the burden of the already overloaded courts with income tax disputes, you have this specialized tribunal, staffed with experts, in tax laws and accounting, who can handle these matters more efficiently.
That makes sense. And I imagine this specialized approach also leads to more informed decisions, given the technical nature of some of these disputes.
Absolutely. Quasi-judicial bodies are often staffed with people who have specific expertise in certain areas, whether it's taxation, environmental law, intellectual property rights. This allows for, well, a deeper understanding of the issues and hopefully more fair outcomes.
Okay, so I'm getting a clear picture, but can we dive into some specific examples to see how these quasi-judicial bodies work in practice?
Of course. Let's start with one you'll definitely recognize. The Election Commission of India. Their job is to ensure free and fair elections, a cornerstone of any democracy, right? They oversee the entire electoral process, everything from voter registration to how the polls are conducted. They have the power to investigate violations and even disqualify candidates.
Wow, that's a huge responsibility, especially in a country as vast and diverse as India.
Absolutely. And the Election Commission works with a high degree of autonomy, which is essential for maintaining its impartiality. They're responsible for enforcing the model code of conduct during elections, those guidelines for political parties and candidates. And they even have the authority to order a revote in constituencies where there have been irregularities.
So they're not just passive observers, they're actively involved in ensuring a level playing field. What about other examples? You mentioned the Finance Commission earlier when we were talking about statutory bodies.
Right, the Finance Commission. Remember, it plays a dual role as a statutory body and a quasi-judicial body. On the quasi-judicial side, they resolve disputes between the central government and the states regarding how financial resources are shared. It's about finding that balance, making sure funds are distributed fairly while considering the needs of different states.
It sounds like a complex equation to solve.
It is. It requires an understanding of not just economics, but also the political dynamics between the center and the states. The Finance Commission's recommendations, while not binding, carry a lot of weight. They're really crucial in shaping India's fiscal federalism.
Okay, let's move on to another area that's often in the news. The National Green Tribunal, or NGT. We talked about them in the context of statutory bodies, but they also have this quasi-judicial function, right?
Exactly. The NGT is unique in that it combines its regulatory role with these quasi-judicial powers to deal with environmental disputes. They cover a wide range of environmental laws like the Water Act, the Forest Act, the Air Act. They can issue orders to stop environmental damage, impose fines, even direct the government to take action.
So they're not just setting standards, they're also acting like a court to enforce those standards, providing solutions for environmental violations.
Precisely. The creation of the NGT was a really significant step in how India handles environmental issues. It's given us a dedicated platform for addressing environmental conflicts, and for holding polluters accountable. They've been involved in a lot of high-profile cases, like tackling air pollution in Delhi, halting big infrastructure projects that could be harmful to the environment.
That's a powerful mandate. But I'm guessing, like all institutions, the NGT also faces its own set of challenges.
Of course. One challenge is that they don't cover every single environmental law, which can lead to conflicts about who has jurisdiction, causing delays. And enforcing their orders can be difficult, especially when powerful entities are involved, even state governments sometimes.
It shows how even the most well-intentioned institutions can face limitations when you're dealing with real-world power dynamics.
Absolutely. And we can't forget about the Central Bureau of Investigation, or CBI. We mostly hear about their investigative work, but they also have a quasi-judicial side. They can file charges in court, prosecute cases, even seek extradition for those involved in crimes that cross borders.
So they're involved in the legal process from beginning to end. But I know the CBI has also been the subject of quite a bit of criticism over the years.
Unfortunately, yes. There have been allegations of political interference, a lack of transparency, and concerns that they might target individuals based on their political affiliations. This has damaged public trust in the CBI and raised questions about whether they can really be impartial and independent.
It really highlights the need for constant vigilance and reform, even for those institutions that are supposed to uphold the law.
Right, and that's something we see with all the quasi-judicial bodies we've talked about. They're balancing a lot.
Yeah.
The need for expertise, efficiency, accessibility, while also making sure they are impartial, transparent, and accountable.
This deep dive has been incredibly insightful. We've gone from statutory bodies to regulatory bodies and now quasi-judicial bodies. These institutions, they're not perfect, but they definitely play a vital role in how India is governed.
Absolutely. Understanding their nuances is key for anyone who wants to engage with the complexities of Indian governance. Whether you're a UPSC aspirant, a student, or just someone who wants to understand how power and policy really work.
Well said. And a big thank you to our expert for guiding us through this complex landscape. And to all our listeners, thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We hope you found this exploration informative. Remember to hit that subscribe button, tap the bell icon so you don't miss future episodes, and share this one with anyone who might find it interesting. Until next time, keep exploring, keep those questions coming, and keep diving deep.